The Intersystem Combat Academy had many rules, but the most important one wasn't written in any manual. Never let the humans look boring. Unfortunately for Corithel Thane, nobody had bothered explaining this to him before he decided to demonstrate Vexry superiority during third-period cultural exchange sparring. The gymnasium buzzed with the particular energy that comes from putting dozens of adolescent apex predators in the same room and calling it education. Instructor Keth9 clicked his mandibles approvingly as he surveyed the controlled chaos. The Nari cadets practiced their signature whip strikes against holographic targets, their scaled tails leaving ionized trails in the air. A cluster of Morganti younglings worked through formation tactics, their collective telepathic chatter creating a low harmonic hum that made the more sensitive species wince. And then there was Marcus Chen, the sole human representative, stretching with the focused intensity of someone who knew he was being watched. "Look at the pink thing," Korith rumbled to his podmate Vec, both Vexry towering nearly 3 meters even in their adolescent forms. "Instructor says we must learn from each species' combat doctrine. What could we possibly learn from something that breaks if you breathe on it wrong?" Vec's throat sac inflated with amusement. "Perhaps how to be more gentle with our food." The comment drew appreciative growls from nearby Vexry cadets. Marcus continued his stretches, apparently oblivious to the discussion about his structural integrity taking place 6 meters away. This was either impressive focus or spectacular stupidity, and the betting pools hadn't yet determined which. "Attention, larvae." Keth9's voice cut through the ambient noise like a plasma torch through tissue paper. Today's exercise focuses on adaptive response under stress. You will be paired with partners from different species classifications. The objective is not to demonstrate dominance, but to understand how different evolutionary pressures create different tactical approaches. A collective groan rose from the assembly. The Vexry particularly despised exercises that didn't end with something bleeding. "Corith Thane," the instructor continued, consulting his datapad with what might have been malicious glee, "you're paired with Cadet Chen." The gymnasium fell silent except for the soft whir of environmental systems. Even the Morganti stopped their telepathic chatter. Marcus looked up from his stretches and offered a polite nod. "Looking forward to working with you." Korith stared down at the human, trying to process the disconnect between what his eyes saw and what his brain insisted should be cowering in terror. The human barely reached his chest plates, possessed no visible natural weapons, and had skin so thin you could see the circulatory system beneath it. This was supposed to be a challenge. "This is insulting," Korith declared, loud enough for the entire gymnasium to hear. "I am descended from the apex hunters of Vexa Prime. My lineage has conquered 17 systems. And you want me to spar with this?" Marcus tilted his head thoughtfully. "I can see how that might seem unfair. Would you prefer if I used both hands, or would that make it too easy for you?" The silence deepened. Several alien cadets later claimed they could actually hear Koritha's ego deflating. "Both hands." Koritha's voice climbed half an octave. "You think your soft little appendages could pose any threat to?" "Positions." Keth9 barked, clearly recognizing the signs of an impending diplomatic incident. "Remember, controlled contact only. This is an exercise in technique, not a blood match." The 2 cadets moved to the center of the sparring circle. Standard Academy protocol called for a formal acknowledgement between partners, but Korith was already calculating the most efficient way to demonstrate why humans had no business sharing breathing space with proper warriors. "Ready position," the instructor called. Marcus raised his hands in a defensive stance that looked almost quaint compared to Koritha's aggressive combat posture. The human's form was textbook perfect, every movement economical and precise, but textbook meant nothing when your opponent outweighed you by a factor of 4 and possessed claws that could punch through starship hulls. "Begin." Korith moved with the fluid grace of a born predator, his massive frame covering the distance between them in a single bound. He grabbed Marcus's extended left hand, intending to demonstrate proper submission techniques to the assembled crowd. The crack was audible throughout the gymnasium. Marcus's metacarpals folded inward with the wet, organic sound of structural failure. Several of the more squeamish species looked away, while others leaned forward with predatory interest. The Thanari began a low clicking that might have been applause or dinner conversation. "Oh," Marcus said mildly, looking down at his mangled hand with the detached curiosity of someone examining an interesting rock formation. "That's definitely broken." Korath released his grip, expecting the human to collapse, scream, or at minimum acknowledge that he had just learned a valuable lesson about the natural order of things. Instead, Marcus flexed his remaining functional fingers and said, "Medic? Could you pop this back into place? I'd like to continue." The gymnasium's collective intake of breath could have powered a small atmospheric processor. Academy Medic YSSL-4 scuttled over on her 8 legs, medical sensors already deployed. "Cadet Chen, you have multiple fractures, severe tissue damage, and what appears to be." "Right, but can you pop it back?" Marcus interrupted gently. "I'm missing valuable training time." YSSL-4's compound eyes whirred as they refocused. "Your pain receptors should be screaming. Your stress hormones should have triggered unconsciousness. Your species' natural fear response should have." "I'm sure it should have," Marcus agreed, then looked at Korath with the same mild expression. "Shall we continue? I think I'm starting to understand your technique." For the first time in his life, Korath felt something unfamiliar creeping up his spinal column. It took him several seconds to identify the sensation as uncertainty. "You want to continue?" he managed. "Well, yes. Unless you're worried about fighting someone with a broken hand. I could understand if that seems unsporting." The medic worked with efficient horror, manipulating the damaged bones back into approximate alignment while Marcus continued his conversation as if discussing weather patterns. No human should be able to maintain social pleasantries while undergoing emergency orthopedic surgery, yet here was this pink, fragile creature treating compound fractures like a minor inconvenience. "There," YSSL-4 announced, wrapping the hand in a bioresponsive cast. "But you absolutely cannot." "Thanks," Marcus said, flexing the newly immobilized digits. He looked up at Korath with what might have been gratitude. "Ready for round 2. Every instinct Korath possessed screamed that something was fundamentally wrong with this scenario. Prey species fled when injured. They submitted when overpowered. They certainly didn't ask for additional punishment while their bones were still settling back into place. That is." Korath found himself actually stammering, which hadn't happened since his 3rd molting. "The exercise is over. You're injured." "Oh, this." Marcus waggled his cast cheerfully. "This is nothing. Back home, we call this Tuesday. Though I admit, your grip strength is impressive. Most people need tools to achieve that kind of compression force." The watching cadets began murmuring among themselves in a dozen different languages, but the universal theme was becoming clear. The human wasn't behaving according to any recognizable biological pattern. Instructor Kethnine approached the pair, his compound eyes reflecting patterns that suggested deep concern. "Cadet Chen, report to medical for full evaluation. Cadet Velthane, excellent demonstration of vexillary combat grips." But Korath wasn't feeling excellent. He was feeling like he'd just stepped on what looked like a harmless ground grub, only to discover it was actually a perfectly camouflaged tunnel viper. The human's reaction wasn't natural. It wasn't normal. And most disturbingly, it wasn't finished. As the cadets dispersed to their next classes, Marcus paused beside Koratha's towering form. "Thanks for the lesson," he said with genuine warmth. "I learned quite a lot about vexillary physiology today, particularly the pressure distribution across your digit joints. Very interesting biomechanics." And with that utterly mundane observation, delivered in the same tone one might use to discuss cafeteria food, Marcus Chen walked away, leaving Korath with the growing suspicion that he had just made the worst tactical error of his young life. The human, it seemed, had been taking notes. News traveled fast in a closed ecosystem populated by gossip-hungry adolescents from 4 to 7 different worlds, and by evening mess, Marcus Chen had achieved something no human had ever accomplished at the Academy. He had become genuinely interesting. The cafeteria buzzed with cross-species chatter as cadets dissected the sparring incident with the enthusiasm of amateur xenobiologists. At the Venari table, Sekvel's tail twitched with excitement as he recounted the story for the 5th time. The bone made this sound, he clicked his mandibles in a wet staccato, and the human just said like someone had spilled juice on his uniform. "Impossible," snorted Crix from her position at the Morganti collective table. The telepathic species rarely engaged in verbal gossip, but the human situation had broken several of their social taboos. Pain response is universal. Either your memory files are corrupted or you're fabricating for social status. Zeph III, representing the crystalline hegemony worlds, chimed in with harmonics that translated roughly to skepticism. My species processes trauma through mineral restructuring. Even we exhibit distress indicators when damaged. What evolutionary pressure creates pain immunity? The debate might have continued indefinitely if not for the arrival of Korath and his Vexry podmates. The towering warriors approached their designated protein station with less swagger than usual, which several observant species noted with interest. "Korath," Sekvel called out, apparently immune to self-preservation instincts. "Demonstrate the grip technique again. Use the nutrition dispenser." "Shut your feeding orifice," Korath growled, but his hearts weren't in it. He'd spent the afternoon reviewing Academy databases, searching for any reference to human pain tolerance or combat doctrine. The results had been frustratingly sparse and unhelpfully contradictory. Vec noticed his pod leader's distraction. "Still brooding about the pink thing? You broke its manipulator appendage. Mission accomplished." "It asked for more," Korath muttered, stabbing his nutrient paste with unnecessary violence. "Prey doesn't ask for more." "Maybe it's defective," suggested Jorth, the youngest of their pod. "Genetic malfunction in the fear centers. My cousin fought a brain-damaged scree once. Similar behavior patterns." The conversation was interrupted by a commotion from the equipment bay adjoining the cafeteria. Maintenance drones scurried about while Academy staff examined what appeared to be a catastrophic failure of a grip strength testing machine. "Attention cadets," announced Supervisor Neth Prime over the intercom system. "The biomechanical assessment station has experienced a technical malfunction. Any cadets who utilize this equipment today should report for medical evaluation." Korath felt his throat sac constrict. He had used that machine. After lunch. Alone. The grip strength tester was designed to handle forces up to 8,000 pounds per square inch, enough to safely assess every known species in the Academy. It shouldn't have been capable of what he was looking at through the viewing port. The machine's grip sensors had been compressed beyond their design tolerances, apparently from the inside out. Metal stress patterns suggested the force had been applied with surgical precision to specific structural weak points, creating a cascade failure that rendered the entire system inoperable. "Fascinating," came a familiar voice from behind him. "I've never seen metal fatigue patterns quite like that." Korath spun around to find Marcus Chen studying the wreckage with academic interest, his cast-wrapped hand holding a data tablet while his functional hand made notes. "You," Korath rumbled. "What do you know about this?" "Only what's visible from here," Marcus replied cheerfully. "Though I'd guess someone with extensive knowledge of stress distribution and materials engineering caused that. Either that, or you've got some seriously defective equipment." Several nearby cadets had stopped eating to listen. The Morganti collective was practically vibrating with telepathic excitement, while the Venari had begun the low humming that indicated the start of wagering pools. "That machine was functioning perfectly when I used it," Korath insisted. "Oh, you used it today?" Marcus looked up from his notes with apparent surprise. "How interesting. I hope your hand is feeling all right." Sudden equipment failures can cause unexpected feedback through the grip sensors. As if summoned by malevolent cosmic timing, Korath became aware of a dull ache in his right hand. specifically in the joints he'd used to demonstrate proper human braking technique. The sensation was subtle, barely noticeable, but it was there. "My hand is fine," he declared, though he unconsciously flexed his fingers as he said it. "Of course it is," Marcus agreed. "Though you might want to have it checked anyway. I've been reading about vexillary physiology, and apparently your species is susceptible to delayed onset ligament stress. Something about your rapid growth cycles creating temporary joint weakness." "Where did you read that?" Korath demanded. "Library Access Terminal. Amazing what you can learn when you have time to research." Marcus gestured with his cast. Being temporarily excused from combat exercises does free up quite a bit of study time. The implications of this statement rippled through the watching crowd like a sonic boom through atmosphere. The human hadn't spent his recovery time resting or seeking sympathy. He'd spent it learning. About them. Instructor Yth-7, who taught xenobiology, happened to be passing by and overheard the conversation. "Cadet Chen, you've been accessing comparative anatomy databases." "Among other things," Marcus confirmed. "I find interspecies biology fascinating. Did you know that Morganti telepathic nodes are actually vulnerable to specific harmonic frequencies? Or that the Nari balance organs can be disrupted by targeted electromagnetic pulses? The diversity of biological systems in the galaxy is remarkable." The cafeteria had gone quiet except for the soft whir of atmospheric recyclers. Every species present was suddenly, uncomfortably aware that the small, injured human had just casually listed their specific anatomical vulnerabilities with the enthusiasm of someone discussing favorite recreational activities. "That's quite thorough research," Yth-7 managed. "I like to be prepared," Marcus said modestly. "Knowledge is the great equalizer, don't you think? Physical advantages are temporary, but understanding endures." Korath felt something cold settling in his stomach region. What kind of understanding? "Oh, all kinds. Combat applications, certainly, but also social dynamics. Herd behaviors. Dominance hierarchies. Predator-prey relationships." Marcus paused thoughtfully. It's amazing how many species base their entire social structure on intimidation tactics. Almost like they've never encountered something that doesn't intimidate easily. The silence stretched until Zeph-3's crystalline structure chimed with nervous harmonics. And what happens when they do encounter such a thing? Marcus smiled, and for reasons none of them could articulate, every predator species in the cafeteria felt their hackles rise. "I suppose we'll find out," he said. "After all, I'll be here for the full academic cycle. Plenty of time for everyone to get to know each other better." He gathered his data tablet and walked away, leaving behind a room full of apex predators who had just realized they might have seriously misidentified which end of the food chain they occupied. Korath stared down at his aching hand and wondered when exactly the human had stopped being prey and started being something infinitely more dangerous, a student. 3 days later, Korath discovered that paranoia was considerably less amusing when you were the one experiencing it. It started with small things. His combat boots, which had been perfectly sized the night before, suddenly felt too tight during morning formations. His locker access code, memorized since his first day, required 3 attempts before the system recognized it. The environmental controls in his dormitory pod seemed to fluctuate between uncomfortably warm and insufferably cold, disrupting his sleep cycle. Any one of these incidents could be dismissed as coincidence. Taken together, they formed a pattern that made his survival instinct scream warnings in frequencies he'd never heard before. "You look terrible," Vec observed as they assembled for advanced tactical simulations. "When did you last achieve proper rest?" "The climate system is malfunctioning," Korath muttered, then immediately regretted sharing even that much information. Admitting weakness went against every vexillary cultural principle. "Have you reported it to maintenance?" "They claim there's nothing wrong with it." Vec's throat sac deflated with confusion. "Then perhaps the problem is with your perception rather than the equipment." Before Korath could respond, Jorth bounded over with the manic energy that marked him as either excited or terrified. Given recent events, either option seemed plausible. "Did you hear about Green-9?" he whispered, using the harmonics reserved for sharing critical intelligence. "What about him?" "Food poisoning. Violent digestive purging. Medbay says he'll recover, but has been voiding fluids for 6 hours straight." Korath felt his spinal ridges rise involuntarily. Green-9 was his pod's reconnaissance specialist, and more importantly, he'd been present when Korath had demonstrated proper human handling techniques 3 days ago. "Coincidence," he growled, but the word tasted like ash in his mouth. "Maybe," Jorth agreed, but his nervous clicking suggested otherwise. Though it's strange that Thek-4 also reported equipment malfunctions last night. His tactical display kept showing human anatomical diagrams during simulation runs. What kind of diagrams? Pressure points, apparently. Stress distribution across bone structures. Joint manipulation techniques. Jorth paused. Very detailed ones. The pieces clicked together in Korath's mind with the inexorable logic of a collapsing star. Every Vexari who had been present during the sparring incident was experiencing technical difficulties, medical emergencies, or psychological harassment. Every one except him. Which meant he was being saved for last. "Where's the human now?" he asked, surprised by how steady his voice sounded. "Medical evaluation," Vec replied. "Routine follow-up on his manipulator damage." Korath felt a growl building in his chest cavity. Medical evaluation meant Marcus was once again positioned as the victim, garnering sympathy and institutional protection while systematically dismantling his opponents. The strategy was brilliant in its simplicity. Hide behind apparent weakness while methodically eliminating threats. "I need to speak with him," Korath declared. "Inadvisable," Vec warned. "The instructors are already questioning your commitment to interspecies cooperation. Another incident could result in disciplinary review." But Korath was already moving, his long strides carrying him through corridors filled with cadets who seemed to shrink away from his passage. Word of the Vexari pod's recent misfortunes had spread through the Academy's gossip networks, and speculation ranged from simple bad luck to elaborate conspiracy theories involving human psychological warfare. He found Marcus in Medical Bay 7, sitting patiently while Medic YSSL-4 conducted bone density scans. The human looked up as Korath entered, his expression shifting to one of pleased recognition. "Korath, how's your hand feeling? Any lingering joint stress?" The casual question confirmed what Korath had already suspected. "You did this." "Did what?" Marcus asked, maintaining eye contact with unsettling directness. "I'm afraid you'll need to be more specific." "My podmates. The equipment failures. The medical emergencies." Korath stepped closer, using his height advantage to create a proper intimidation profile. "All of it." "That sounds like quite an elaborate conspiracy," Marcus observed. "Do you have evidence to support these accusations?" "I don't need evidence. I know." "Knowing and proving are different things," Marcus replied gently. "Though I suppose your species places less emphasis on logical proof than on intuitive certainty." Medic YSSL-4 looked up from her scanners, compound eyes whirring with concern. "Cadet Velthane, are you experiencing stress-related paranoid ideation? I can prescribe mild anxiolytics." "I'm not paranoid," Korath snarled, then realized how that sounded. "Of course not," Marcus agreed. "Paranoia implies irrational fear. Your concerns seem perfectly rational to me." The statement hung in the air like a charged particle beam. Korath found himself parsing the words for hidden meanings, secondary implications, veiled threats. Which was exactly what Marcus had intended. "Why?" Korath asked finally. "Why what? Why are you doing this?" Marcus tilted his head thoughtfully. "I'm not sure I understand the question. Are you asking why I'm receiving medical treatment for injuries you inflicted? or why I'm conducting research into interspecies psychology, or why I'm documenting behavioral patterns among Academy cadets. Documenting. Oh yes. I'm keeping very detailed records. Sleep disruption effects on vexillary cognitive function. Stress responses to perceived threats. Group dynamics under pressure. Marcus gestured to his cast. Having a legitimate medical excuse to spend time in various academy facilities has been quite educational. Korath felt something fracture in his understanding of the situation. This isn't revenge. Revenge? Marcus seemed genuinely puzzled. Why would I seek revenge? You provided me with exactly what I needed. What you needed for what? My thesis project, of course. I'm studying predator-prey relationship dynamics in mixed species environments. Your pod volunteered to be my test subjects the moment you decided I was prey. The medical bay spun slightly around Korath's visual field. Test subjects. Willing participants. Technically. I never asked you to demonstrate dominance behaviors or establish territorial hierarchies. You did that entirely on your own initiative. Marcus's smile was warm and entirely terrifying. Though I'll admit, your responses have exceeded my most optimistic projections. Cadet Chen, Medic YSSL-4 interrupted. Your bone regeneration is proceeding remarkably quickly. At this rate, you'll have full functionality restored within days rather than weeks. Human physiology is quite resilient, Marcus confirmed. We heal fast, adapt faster, and remember everything. It's served us well as a species. Korath stared down at the small, injured human who was apparently conducting advanced psychological warfare while maintaining perfect academy conduct scores. What happens when your thesis is complete? I present my findings to the Advanced Xenopsychology Review Board, Marcus replied. Though I suspect the results will be of interest to various military science departments as well. Understanding how to systematically neutralize superior opponents through psychological pressure rather than physical confrontation could have significant tactical applications. You're weaponizing our own instincts against us. I'm documenting how your instincts create exploitable weaknesses, Marcus corrected. The weaponization is just a practical application of the research. Korath felt his worldview performing structural realignments that would have impressed a quantum engineer. The human wasn't prey pretending to be a predator. He wasn't even a predator disguised as prey. He was something altogether different, a creature that had evolved beyond simple predator-prey dynamics into something that treated the entire concept as a quaint behavioral curiosity to be studied and manipulated. You're not afraid of us at all, he realized. Why would I be? Marcus asked. You're just another dataset. Admittedly a large, loud dataset with impressive dentition, but data nonetheless. And with that observation, delivered in the same conversational tone one might use to discuss weather patterns, Marcus Chen completed Korath's education in the fundamental difference between being dangerous and being apex. The emergency faculty meeting convened at 0600 hours, which in academy terms meant something had gone catastrophically wrong with their carefully orchestrated interspecies diplomacy program. Dean Vorthprime's tentacles writhed with administrative anxiety as she reviewed the reports flooding her neural interfaces. 17 separate incidents in 4 days, she announced to the assembled department heads. Equipment sabotage, food contamination, psychological harassment campaigns, and at least 3 cadets requesting immediate transfer to different galaxies. Professor Cleithmajor, head of military psychology, adjusted his cybernetic implants with audible grinding sounds. The common factor appears to be interaction with the human exchange student. Cadet Chen has become a focal point for unprecedented disruption. Unprecedented because is winning, observed Commander Nick Sactual from Strategic Studies. The ancient warrior's battle scars pulsed with bioluminescent approval. The vexillary pod initiated hostilities and are now requesting administrative intervention because their target refused to capitulate appropriately. This isn't warfare, protested Instructor Keth 9. This is an academic institution designed to foster cooperation and understanding between species. Understanding works both ways, Nick's Actual replied. Perhaps we're finally learning something about human methodology. The debate might have continued indefinitely if not for the arrival of the subject himself. Marcus Chen entered the conference chamber with the confidence of someone who had been expecting this conversation for days, carrying a data tablet and wearing what appeared to be a completely healed hand. Cadet Chen, Dean Vorthprime began, these allegations of systematic intimidation are accurate, Marcus interrupted politely, though I prefer to think of it as applied behavioral research. Would you like to see my preliminary findings? The faculty exchanged glances that would have powered small fusion reactors. Students didn't typically interrupt administrative disciplinary proceedings with academic presentations. Your findings. Dean Vorthprime managed. From my thesis project on interspecies dominance hierarchies, Marcus clarified, activating a holographic display that filled the chamber's central space. I've been documenting how different species establish and maintain social control through intimidation, with particular focus on the psychological vulnerabilities this creates. The display showed complex behavioral analysis charts, stress response measurements, and what appeared to be detailed personality profiles for every Academy cadet Marcus had encountered. This is highly irregular, Professor Cleithmajor protested. Students don't conduct unauthorized psychological experiments on their classmates. Unauthorized. Marcus looked genuinely confused. I submitted my research proposal to the Ethics Review Board 6 weeks ago. Professor Yith7 approved the methodology, and Dean Vorthprime signed the authorization forms herself. Silence filled the chamber like a vacuum leak. The dean's tentacles moved through what her species called the dance of bureaucratic horror as she accessed her administrative databases. Here it is, she announced weakly. Research Project 4471 Alpha, Comparative Analysis of Intimidation-Based Social Structures in Multi-Species Educational Environments. Status, approved. You buried an advanced psychological warfare study in routine academic paperwork. Commander Nick's Actual asked, and his tone suggested professional admiration. I prefer to think of it as demonstrating human administrative efficiency, Marcus replied, though I should clarify that the psychological warfare applications were entirely unintentional. I was simply documenting observed behaviors when the Vexry pod volunteered to become active participants. Volunteered. Instructor Keth9's mandibles clicked with skepticism. Certainly. The moment Cadet Velthane decided to establish dominance through physical intimidation, he initiated the experimental protocol. Everything that followed was simply data collection. The holographic display shifted to show detailed timelines of each incident, complete with biometric readings, behavioral predictions, and outcome probabilities. The thoroughness was breathtaking and slightly terrifying. These projections, Professor Cleithmajor said, studying the charts with professional fascination. You predicted their responses with 97% accuracy. Intimidation-based hierarchies follow predictable patterns, Marcus explained. Once you understand the underlying psychology, individual reactions become statistically inevitable. Vexry psychology is particularly straightforward. They're essentially very large, very loud bullies who've never encountered anything that doesn't bully easily. And how do humans fit into these hierarchies? Dean Vorthprime asked, though her tone suggested she already suspected the answer. We don't, Marcus said simply. Human social structures aren't based on intimidation or physical dominance. They're based on adaptability, cooperation, and what you might call strategic patience. We don't need to be the biggest or strongest because we're very good at making bigger, stronger things work for us instead. Commander Nick's Actual leaned forward. Elaborate. Take Cadet Velthane's pod. They operate on pack dynamics where physical superiority determines social position. But what happens when you introduce something that doesn't acknowledge their superiority as relevant? Something that treats their displays of dominance as data points rather than threats. Cognitive dissonance, Professor Cleithmager supplied. Their entire worldview becomes unstable. Exactly. And unstable systems are remarkably easy to manipulate if you understand the stress points. Marcus gestured to his formerly broken hand. A single broken bone became the lever I used to dismantle their entire social structure. Your hand, Dean Vorthprime observed. It appears to have healed with unusual rapidity. Human bone regeneration is quite efficient, Marcus confirmed. Though I should mention that it was functionally healed within 18 hours of the initial injury. I maintained the facade of disability because it provided excellent cover for my research activities. The admission sent ripples of shock through the assembled faculty. Several species began rapid calculations about human physiological capabilities, while others started reviewing their own tactical doctrines with newfound concern. So you were never actually injured, Instructor Kethnine stated. Oh, I was definitely injured. Cadet Velthane's grip strength is impressive. But injury and incapacitation are different things. Humans have extensive experience functioning through damage that would disable other species. Because you're a predator species pretending to be prey, Commander Nixactual concluded. No, Marcus corrected gently. We're a species that evolved beyond predator-prey dynamics entirely. We don't hunt our food, we grow it. We don't fight our enemies, we make them fight each other. We don't dominate through strength, we adapt until strength becomes irrelevant. He paused, looking around the chamber filled with representatives from dozens of species, each convinced they understood their place in the galactic hierarchy. The real finding of my research isn't how to manipulate intimidation-based societies, he continued. It's that such societies are fundamentally unstable when confronted with something that doesn't operate by their rules. Cadet Velthane didn't lose because I was stronger or more dangerous. He lost because he was playing a game I wasn't even participating in. Dean Vorthprime's tentacles had achieved configurations that suggested either deep thought or the onset of administrative breakdown. What do you recommend we do with these findings? Publish them, Marcus said immediately. The Academy's mission is to prepare future military leaders for interspecies cooperation. Understanding how humans actually function, rather than how we appear to function, seems relevant to that goal. And the Vexry cadets who participated in your study should probably be thanked for their contribution to xenopsychological research, though I'd recommend explaining to them that being outmaneuvered by a superior strategy isn't actually shameful, just educational. Commander Nixactual's scars pulsed with what might have been laughter. And I suppose you'd be willing to share these strategic insights with our tactical studies program. Already prepared the curriculum, Marcus confirmed, producing another data tablet. Introduction to Human Psychological Operations, Advanced Non-Intimidation Warfare, and Practical Applications of Perceived Weakness as Strategic Advantage. I thought they might make interesting electives. The faculty stared at the human cadet who had just systematically deconstructed their understanding of interspecies relations, documented the process with academic rigor, and offered to teach others how to replicate his results. There is, Dean Vorthprime said finally, nothing in Academy regulations that prohibits students from becoming instructors while completing their own studies. Excellent, Marcus replied cheerfully. Though I should warn you, the advanced course includes practical exercises. I'll need volunteers willing to have their worldviews systematically dismantled for educational purposes. And so the Intersystem Combat Academy learned that the most dangerous predators were often the ones that didn't look like predators at all, but rather like small, polite students who took very detailed notes and never forgot to say thank you.